This is the brief on the ultra-violent 2014 Japanese horror film, As the Gods Will. Okay, so what's this one about? Well, director Takashi Miike basically throws these high school students, like our main guy Shun Takahata, into these deadly versions of kids' games. Run by these weird, kinda cute but super brutal gods, they gotta fight just to stay alive. Okay, to really get this cult hit, let's look at three key things. First off, the whole plot. It's driven by these insane, lethal versions of kids' games. Right from the get-go, you've got this giant Daruma doll. You know, the good luck charm thing? Running a deadly game of red light, green light. And if you move, boom, your head literally explodes into red marbles. Yeah, it's that kind of movie. Second, there's some real social commentary going on here, especially about just blindly following orders. Miike takes these everyday Japanese symbols, like the Maneki Niko, lucky cat, and turns them into these random psycho killers enforcing crazy rules. It kind of makes you think, right? Maybe forcing conformity isn't just strict, it's senseless and kind of childishly cruel. And finally, number 3. Miike just goes full-on surreal and psychological. He twists these cute cultural icons into monsters, right? And then he puts these poor teenagers through the ringer, betrayal, tough moral choices, serious trauma, just to survive this messed up game happening everywhere. It really shows the mental toll. So yeah, As the Gods Will is this wild, dark, absurd ride that makes you wonder, how far would you go just to survive?
Welcome to the debate. Today we are diving deep into the intense, pretty surreal world of the 2014 Japanese horror film, As the Gods Will. That's Kami-sama no Iu Tōri in Japanese. It's directed by Takashi Miike, who, is often visionary, sometimes shocking.
Definitely shocking.
Right. So this film, it's the one where high school students are suddenly forced into these lethal versions of children's games by, well, mysterious oversized toys. Gods, perhaps. It's a cinematic explosion, really, and it demands multiple readings.
For sure.
So the central question we're grappling with today is this. When you really analyze As the Gods Will, is the film fundamentally a critique rooted in social commentary on conformity and authority? Using the deadly games as these sharp metaphors for systemic pressure.
Existential chaos and disorientation over a more structured, maybe political allegory?
Exactly. And I'll be arguing that the film is fundamentally a potent form of social critique, one that uses its hyper-stylized violence not just for shock, but to amplify a warning about societal obedience.
And I'll be taking the other side. While I absolutely see the elements of social critique there, you can't miss them. I maintain that the film's, let's say, defining essence lies more in its embrace of surrealist aesthetics and the kind of existential chaos that provokes. For me, Miike's stylistic choices are really designed to emphasize the irrationality of existence itself. Okay, I see why you'd think that. But let me offer a perspective maybe more grounded in the film's specific cultural context. My core thesis is that these deadly games are, well, they're designed as razor-sharp metaphors for rigid societal systems, particularly the high pressure for obedience and adherence to collective norms that are, deeply ingrained in Japanese culture. Think about the concept of tatame, for instance, this idea of the public facade, the behavior society expects, which often means suppressing your true feelings, your hone. The games immediately establish this dynamic. The opening game, Daruma-san ga Koronda, it takes place in a totally mundane high school classroom that symbolizes how institutional authority just permeates even the most familiar, disciplined spaces. And the rule death for any movement, any deviation, when the Daruma doll lux, it's a literal embodiment of the dire consequences of stepping out of line, of deviating from societal norms. It demands stillness, obedience. And the protagonist, Shun Takahata, his entire journey from apathy and this profound boredom to, eventually, forced agency, that's a necessary rebellion against passive conformity and these oppressive social structures.
That's a compelling reading, especially bringing in tatame. But isn't the sheer framework of the film just too fantastical, too bizarre? Maybe too unhinged to really sustain a grounded societal critique like that? Where I diverge is on the primary function of all that spectacle. I believe the film is first and foremost an exercise in surreal horror. It's designed to depict the absurdity of existence. Miike's signature style, this deliberate blending of the grotesque with the whimsical, is, I think, a form of cinematic surrealism. You mentioned the exploding heads. They immediately turn into showers of bright red marbles. It's absurd. We see these playful cultural icons like the giant Daruma doll or the Maneki-Nico cat functioning as terrifying, capricious gods. This visual dissonance, this lack of conventional logic, it aligns the film far more powerfully with absurdist philosophy, the search for meaning in a meaningless universe, rather than a straightforward critique of, say, the pressures of the Japanese education system. The surrealism is the aesthetic wrapper, the absurdism is the existential core.
Okay, let's focus on the interpretation of those arbitrary rules and the authority behind them, because I think this is where the commentary really hits hardest, and where we need to separate the, let's say, method from the message. I'd argue that the gods enforcing rules without transparency, without mercy, directly parallels real-world institutions, whether it's school, government, corporations, institutions that demand unquestioning compliance.
But the nature of the rules.
Exactly. The arbitrary nature of the rules is the critique. It questions blind obedience by showing the system is simultaneously illogical and non-negotiable. If we look beyond just the first Daruma game, think about later games like Kagome Kagome. Contestants are blindfolded, forced to guess who is behind them. It's terrifying. Doesn't that reflect the pressure cooker environment of things like standardized testing or social mobility, where the rules feel opaque and success often hinges on this weird ability to intuit the system's irrational demands rather than, genuine merit or skill? The system might be completely insane, but you still have to play by its rules to survive. That feels very real, socially speaking.
I'm sorry, I just don't quite buy that the rules are primarily a critique of bureaucracy when they result in such extreme theatricality. I mean, if the focus were purely on compliance and bureaucracy, the means of enforcement wouldn't be so profoundly illogical, would they? Relying on things like massive wooden kokeshi dolls that just crush participants with inexplicable force, the dark humor, the overwhelming grotesqueness of the deaths, I think it prevents the film from maintaining a subtle or even a focused social critique.
So you think the style overwhelms the substance?
I'd frame it differently. I think the priority here is generating existential dread through absolute uncertainty and powerlessness. The characters are victims of some cosmic force whose motives are entirely unknowable. That Daruma doll isn't just a harsh principle. It's like an indifferent divinity demanding obedience to random fatal whims. The film's title, As the Gods Will, even suggests submission to this divine, unknowable authority. The emphasis feels much more on the individual's lack of control in a chaotic universe. That's the cornerstone of the absurd, isn't it? Not social policy.
Okay, I acknowledge the style, of course. It's Miike. He's known for pushing boundaries. But I would argue that he uses the exaggerated visuals and the dark humor not to negate the message, but actually to amplify the critique through hyperbole. Think of it as savage satire. The extreme nature of the violence makes the consequences of conformity or nonconformity visceral, unforgettable.
Amplify or distract?
Amplify, I think. And the subversion of specific traditional Japanese children's games and cultural symbols that grounds the satire in a specific cultural context. When the Maneki-Nico, the lucky cat, a symbol of welcome and fortune, suddenly requires players to choose a path based on a coin toss, demanding this high-stakes gamble with their lives, doesn't that ground the critique? It feels like a commentary on the economic and social pressures, the risk-taking required for success, perhaps, in a stagnant society. The games become these rituals of control masked as childhood pastimes, and that twist, that specific cultural grounding, feels crucial to the social commentary.
That's an interesting point about satire and the Maneki-Nico, but I still think the sheer excess moves it past effective societal critique. It definitely demands that we look beyond the carnage and, form our own conclusions.